The faculty meeting room at Westfield High School was packed that Tuesday afternoon. Teachers squeezed into uncomfortable plastic chairs, some clutching coffee cups like lifelines after a long day of classes. Principal Anderson stood at the front, clicking through a PowerPoint presentation about next semester's budget allocations. Most teachers were only half paying attention, mentally planning their evening or grading papers in their laps. But when the principal reached the slide about department funding, the energy in the room shifted. Due to recent state funding changes, we'll need to make some adjustments, Principal Anderson said, his voice carrying that apologetic tone administrators use when delivering bad news. The music department will see a 10% reduction, while we're allocating additional funds to the math and science departments for new technology. Robert Sterling, the music teacher and orchestra conductor, sat up straight in his chair, his eyes narrowed behind his designer glasses. For 15 years, Robert had built Westfield's music program into something special. His orchestra had won state competitions. His students had been accepted to prestigious music schools. Local newspapers had written glowing articles about him. He'd even been featured on the morning news once, and now they were cutting his budget. "Excuse me, Principal Anderson," Robert said, his voice dripping with barely controlled irritation. "Could you explain why the arts are once again taking a back seat to technology purchases?" The principal shifted uncomfortably. "Robert, I understand your concern, but the school board believes that enhancing our STEM programs will better serve our students' future career prospects." "Career prospects," Robert repeated, letting out a bitter laugh, because apparently creating cultured, well-rounded human beings isn't as important as teaching kids to stare at computer screens all day. A few teachers exchanged uncomfortable glances. This wasn't the first time Robert had gone on one of his rants about the importance of arts education. He was passionate, sure, but lately that passion had started to feel more like superiority. Daniel Brooks, the quiet math teacher sitting near the back, kept his eyes on his notes. He'd heard all this before. Robert had a habit of making little comments in the teacher's lounge, subtle digs about how some subjects were all facts and formulas with no soul, no beauty, no real meaning. Daniel never responded. He'd been teaching math for 15 years, and he didn't need to defend his subject to anyone. "The decision has been made," Principal Anderson said firmly, trying to regain control of the meeting. "Now moving on to the upcoming parent-teacher conferences." But Robert wasn't done. He leaned over to Ms. Patterson, the English teacher sitting next to him, and said in a voice just loud enough for nearby teachers to hear, "I suppose we should just turn this place into a factory for little robots. Why bother teaching them about Mozart or Beethoven when they can learn spreadsheets?" Ms. Patterson gave him a tight smile and turned her attention back to the principal. The meeting wrapped up 20 minutes later, and teachers began filing out. Daniel gathered his papers and headed for the door, hoping to avoid any hallway confrontations. But as he stepped into the corridor, he heard Robert's voice behind him. "Must be nice, Daniel." Daniel stopped and turned. Robert was standing with a small group of teachers, arms crossed, that familiar smirk on his face. "I'm sorry?" Daniel said. "Your department swimming in money while programs that actually enrich young minds get slashed. Must feel good to be valued for all the wrong reasons." Daniel took a breath. "Robert, I didn't make the budget decisions. I'm just here to teach, same as you." Right. Just teaching, filling their heads with numbers and equations. Very inspiring." Robert's tone was mocking now, and the other teachers were clearly uncomfortable. One of them mumbled something about needing to get to class and hurried away. "Math is useful," Daniel said calmly. "It helps students think logically, solve problems." "Oh, I'm sure it's very useful," Robert interrupted. "For building calculators and balancing checkbooks. But where's the passion? Where's the human element? When was the last time an equation made someone feel something real?" Daniel could feel his jaw tightening, but he kept his voice level. "Different subjects serve different purposes. That doesn't make one better than another." Robert laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound, spoken like someone who's never experienced true artistry. "Tell me, Daniel, when's the last time you even attended a concert? Read poetry? Visited a museum? Or is your entire world just numbers on a whiteboard?" "I should get back to my classroom," Daniel said quietly. He wasn't going to win this argument, and he knew it. Robert wanted a fight, wanted to feel superior, and Daniel wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. As Daniel walked away, he heard Robert say to the remaining teachers, "That's the problem with people who live in their heads. They don't know what it means to really feel something. Over the next few weeks, the tension between the two departments grew worse. Robert seemed determined to prove that the arts were being undervalued and, more importantly, that his talents were being overlooked. He made a point of playing his violin in the teacher's lounge during lunch, sighing dramatically about how nobody appreciated real culture anymore. His orchestra students started noticing too. During rehearsals, Robert would make offhand comments about how lucky they were to be studying something meaningful, something that connected to the human soul, unlike those poor kids stuck in math class solving for X. Meanwhile, Daniel's students had no idea anything was wrong. He showed up every day with the same patient smile, the same clear explanations, the same genuine interest in helping them understand. When students struggled, he stayed late. When they succeeded, he celebrated with them. He never complained about budget cuts or made them feel like they were in the wrong subject. But other teachers were starting to notice the growing hostility. In the teacher's lounge one afternoon, Ms. Chen, the history teacher, tried to smooth things over. "Robert, maybe you could collaborate with Daniel on something," she suggested. Show how math and music connect. There's a lot of mathematical concepts in musical theory." "Please," Robert scoffed, not looking up from the musical score he was reviewing. "That's surface level at best. Music is an art form. You can't reduce it to formulas." "I wasn't suggesting. Besides, I doubt Daniel would know where to begin. The man probably thinks Baroque is a type of bankruptcy." Ms. Chen gave up and left the room, shaking her head. The breaking point came during a meeting about the school's annual talent show. Every year, Westfield High put on a big event showcasing student talents: singers, dancers, comedy acts, whatever kids wanted to share. Teachers from different departments usually helped coordinate different aspects of the show. Robert, of course, ran the musical performances. Daniel had volunteered to help with the technical aspects: sound system setup, lighting coordination, things that required careful calculations and planning. During the planning meeting, Daniel made a suggestion. "What if we included a segment showing how math and science connect to art? Some students from my class have been working on fractals and geometric patterns. We could project them during one of the musical pieces." The other teachers seemed interested. "That could be really cool," one said, "like a visual background." But Robert's face had gone red. He set down his pen with a loud click. "This is a talent show," he said coldly, "not a science fair. We're here to celebrate genuine artistic ability, not turn it into a classroom lesson about shapes." "I just thought," Daniel began. "No, Daniel. That's the problem. You think everything needs a mathematical explanation. Some things exist simply to be beautiful, to be felt. But of course, someone who spends all day with numbers wouldn't understand that, would you?" The room went silent. Every teacher there felt the weight of Robert's words, the cruelty beneath them. Daniel looked at Robert for a long moment. Then he simply nodded. "You're right. It was just an idea. Forget I mentioned it." But as the meeting continued, everyone in that room knew something had shifted. This wasn't just professional disagreement anymore. This was personal, and Robert Sterling wasn't anywhere near done proving his point. The talent show planning meetings continued over the next 2 weeks, and Robert's attitude only got worse. He seemed to take every opportunity to point out what he saw as the difference between real artists and everyone else. And somehow, Daniel always ended up being his target. During one meeting, when Daniel offered to help reorganize the schedule to fit in more acts, Robert waved him off dismissively. "This isn't a math problem you can solve with a formula, Daniel. Creating a show requires artistic intuition, something you wouldn't understand." The other teachers were getting tired of it. Ms. Wilson, the drama teacher, had started rolling her eyes every time Robert spoke. Mr. Thompson, who taught physical education, had stopped coming to the meetings altogether. Even Principal Anderson had pulled Robert aside once to ask him to be more collegial, but that only seemed to make things worse. Then came the meeting that changed everything. It was a Thursday afternoon, and the planning committee had gathered in the music room. Student performances were coming up in just 3 weeks, and there were still details to iron out. Robert sat at his desk near the front, his expensive violin resting in its case beside him like a trophy. Daniel had brought a simple spreadsheet showing the timing for each act, how long the transitions would take, and when intermission should happen. He passed copies around the table. "I worked out the schedule," Daniel explained. "If we keep each, Act to these time limits, we can fit everyone in and still end by 9 o'clock. Ms. Wilson looked at the spreadsheet and nodded approvingly. This is really helpful, Daniel. Nice work. But Robert picked up the paper like it was contaminated. He glanced at it for barely 5 seconds before setting it down. How incredibly thrilling, he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. A spreadsheet. Because that's exactly what art needs, to be reduced to numbers and time slots. Daniel took a breath. I'm just trying to help make sure everything runs smoothly. Smoothly, Robert repeated. He stood up and walked to the front of the room, positioning himself like he was about to give a lecture. You know what your problem is, Daniel. You think everything in life can be organized into neat little boxes. Act 1, 12 minutes. Act 2, 8 minutes. Intermission, 15 minutes. But real art doesn't work that way. Real talent can't be scheduled. Robert, that's not what Daniel started. Tell me something, Robert interrupted, leaning against his desk with his arms crossed. In all your years of teaching formulas and theorems, have you ever actually experienced real culture? Have you ever performed anything? Created anything beautiful with your own hands? The room had gone quiet. The other teachers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Daniel's voice was calm but firm. I don't think this is the right time. No, I think it's the perfect time, Robert said, warming to his subject now. He was enjoying this. Because here, you are making schedules and crunching numbers for our talent show, but I'd bet everything I own that you've never actually been on stage. You've never held an instrument. You've never put yourself out there and shared something real with an audience. Robert, come on, Ms. Wilson said. That's not fair. But Robert wasn't backing down. If anything, he was getting more aggressive. Why isn't it fair? We're supposed to be educators, right? We're supposed to inspire young people. But how can someone inspire others to appreciate beauty when they've never experienced it themselves? Daniel stood up, gathering his papers. I think I should go. Wait, Robert said, and there was something dangerous in his tone now. I have a better idea. Everyone looked at him. Robert walked over to his violin case and opened it slowly, deliberately. He lifted out his instrument, a beautiful, gleaming violin that he'd paid a small fortune for. He held it up like it was Excalibur. You want to be involved in our talent show? Robert said. You want to contribute? Then let me issue you a challenge, Daniel. Right here, in front of everyone. Robert, this is ridiculous, Mr. Peterson, the science teacher said. But Robert ignored him, his eyes locked on Daniel. Come to my orchestra rehearsal tomorrow, in front of my students. Take my violin and play something. Anything, just one piece. Daniel stared at him. Why would I do that? To prove you're not just a numbers guy hiding behind a whiteboard, Robert said. To prove that you have even a shred of artistic understanding. To show everyone here that you're not exactly what I think you are. Someone who wouldn't know real talent if it hit him in the face. The cruelty in Robert's voice was unmistakable now. This wasn't friendly competition. This was humiliation, pure and simple. He wanted to embarrass Daniel in front of students, in front of colleagues, to prove once and for all that the arts were superior and that people like Daniel had no business being anywhere near a talent show. This is completely unprofessional, Ms. Wilson said, standing up. Robert, you're out of line. Am I? Robert said, still looking at Daniel. Or am I just tired of pretending that all subjects are equally valuable? That someone who's spent their entire career teaching kids to solve for X has anything meaningful to contribute to a celebration of real talent? Daniel's jaw was tight. His hands, usually so steady when writing equations on a board, were clenched into fists at his sides. For a long moment, he didn't say anything. The smart move would be to walk away, to refuse to participate in Robert's game. But something in Robert's smug expression in the way he held that violin like a weapon made Daniel's decision for him. Fine, Daniel said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. What? Robert said, clearly surprised. I'll do it, Daniel repeated. Tomorrow, your rehearsal. I'll try to play your violin. Robert's surprise quickly morphed back into satisfaction. He smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who just won a bet they knew they couldn't lose. "Excellent," Robert said. "Tomorrow at 3:30, my advanced orchestra class. Don't be late." He paused, then added, "And, Daniel, I wouldn't want you to embarrass yourself too badly, so I'll choose something simple. Maybe Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Even a beginner should be able to handle that, right?" A few teachers laughed nervously, unsure whether Robert was joking or being cruel. Daniel suspected it was the latter. The meeting broke up shortly after that. As teachers filed out, several of them stopped to talk to Daniel. "You don't have to do this," Ms. Wilson said. "He's being a complete jerk." "I know," Daniel said. "Then why?" Mr. Peterson asked. "Why give him what he wants?" Daniel looked toward the music room, where Robert was carefully placing his violin back in its case, whistling to himself. "Because sometimes," Daniel said softly, "the only way to end something is to go through it." By the next morning, word had spread throughout the entire school. Students whispered about it in hallways. Teachers discussed it in the lounge. Someone had even created a poll on social media asking who would win in a music teacher versus math teacher showdown. Most students assumed it would be embarrassing for Mr. Brooks, the quiet math teacher who barely spoke above a conversational tone. Mr. Sterling was legendary at Westfield. He was dramatic, confident, talented. His orchestra had won awards. How could a math teacher possibly compare? In his afternoon classes, Daniel's students approached him with concern. "Mr. Brooks, is it true?" asked Tyler, one of his junior students. "Are you really going to try to play violin in front of Mr. Sterling's class?" "That's the plan," Daniel said, writing a calculus problem on the board. "But why?" asked another student, Jennifer. "Everyone knows Mr. Sterling is just trying to make you look bad." Daniel turned from the board and looked at his class. These were good kids. They worked hard. They came to him when they struggled, and he helped them understand. They deserved an honest answer. "Sometimes in life," Daniel said, "people will challenge you. Sometimes those challenges are fair, and sometimes they're not. But how you respond to them says a lot about who you are. I could walk away, and maybe that would be the smart thing. But I'd rather show you that it's okay to try something difficult, even if you might fail, than to teach you to hide from challenges." The classroom was silent. Then Tyler spoke up. "We'll be there, Mr. Brooks, to support you." "You don't have to," Daniel started. "We're coming," Jennifer said firmly. Several other students nodded in agreement. Word got around even faster after that. By the time 3:30 rolled around the next day, the music room wasn't just full, it was packed. Students lined the walls. Teachers stood in the back. A few parents who'd heard about the challenge had even shown up. And there, at the front of the room, stood Robert Sterling with his violin, wearing his most expensive suit and the biggest smile anyone had ever seen. He was about to get exactly what he wanted. The hallway outside the music room buzzed with energy. Students clustered in small groups, replaying what they'd just witnessed. Daniel's math students surrounded him like a protective shield. Their faces lit up with pride and relief. "Mr. Brooks, that was amazing," Tyler said, practically bouncing on his feet. "I had no idea you could play violin. Where did you learn?" Jennifer asked. "Have you been taking lessons or something?" Daniel smiled, but there was something tired in his expression. "It was a long time ago. I really should get back to my classroom. I have papers to grade." "But sir," Tyler started. "Let's just move on from this, okay?" Daniel said gently but firmly. "It's over now." He walked down the hallway and his students reluctantly let him go, though they continued discussing what had happened in excited whispers. Back in the music room, Robert's orchestra students sat in uncomfortable silence. Their teacher stood frozen at the front of the room, staring at his violin like he'd never seen it before. "Mr. Sterling?" called out Amy, one of his senior violinists. "Should we start rehearsal?" Robert blinked, seeming to snap back to reality. Yes, of course. Let's run through the Vivaldi piece from the beginning." But his heart wasn't in it. As his students played, Robert's mind was elsewhere. He kept replaying the moment when Daniel had lifted the violin, the way his fingers had found the strings, the unexpected competence in his playing. It wasn't masterful, not by a professional's standards, but it was real. It was genuine. And that speech, That quiet, dignified speech about not tearing others down. Robert felt something unfamiliar twisting in his chest. Was it shame, regret? He wasn't sure. All he knew was that his moment of triumph had somehow left him feeling hollow. The rehearsal ended early. Robert dismissed his students and sat alone in the empty music room as the sun set outside the windows, casting long shadows across the floor. That evening, Robert couldn't stop thinking about it. He sat in his expensive apartment surrounded by his awards and certificates, his framed newspaper articles, his photographs with famous musicians. All the proof of his success, his talent, his importance. But for the first time in years, these things didn't bring him comfort. He picked up his phone and scrolled through social media. Students had already posted about the challenge. Most of the comments were supportive of Daniel. Mr. Brooks was so brave for trying. Why was Sterling being such a jerk? Math teacher showed more class than music teacher TBH. Robert set his phone down and rubbed his eyes. When had he become this person? When had proving his worth become more important than actually teaching? The next morning, Robert arrived at school earlier than usual. He had a free period first thing, and instead of preparing for class, he found himself walking to the main office. "Morning, Robert," said Mrs. Chen, the school secretary. "You're here early. Is Principal Anderson available?" Robert asked. "He's in his office." "Go on in." Robert knocked and entered. Principal Anderson looked up from his computer, surprise evident on his face. "Robert, what can I do for you?" Robert closed the door and sat down. For a moment, he struggled to find the words. "I want to apologize," he finally said. "For yesterday. For the past few weeks, actually. For my behavior." Principal Anderson leaned back in his chair. "I'm listening." "I was out of line with Daniel," Robert continued. "The challenge, the way I spoke to him in meetings, all of it. I let my ego get in the way of professionalism, and that's not acceptable." "No," the principal agreed. "It's not." "There's something else," Robert said. "I'd like to know more about Daniel. His background. He clearly has musical training, but he's never mentioned it. Why is that?" Principal Anderson studied Robert for a long moment. "That's not really my story to tell." "Please," Robert said. "I need to understand," the principal sighed. "What I can tell you is that Daniel Brooks is one of the finest teachers I've ever had the privilege to work with. He shows up every day, helps every student who asks, stays late, comes in early. He never complains, never asks for special recognition. And yes, he has a background in music. Quite an impressive one, actually. How impressive? That's something you should ask him directly," Principal Anderson said. "But Robert, let me ask you something. Why does it matter? Why do you need to know?" Robert sat quietly, considering the question. "Because I judged him without knowing anything about him. I assumed he was just a numbers person with no understanding of art or culture. And I was wrong." "Yes," the principal said. "You were." During his free period, Robert found himself standing outside Daniel's classroom. Through the small window in the door, he could see Daniel at his desk, working through a stack of papers, occasionally making notes in the margins. Robert raised his hand to knock, then hesitated. What would he even say? Before he could decide, the bell rang. Students began flooding into Daniel's classroom for the next period. Robert stepped back and walked away, but he couldn't let it go. During lunch, Robert sat in the teacher's lounge, and when Ms. Wilson came in, he approached her. "Can I ask you something?" Robert said. Ms. Wilson looked wary. "Depends what it is. Daniel, what do you know about his background? Before he came to Westfield?" Ms. Wilson poured herself coffee, taking her time. "Why the sudden interest?" "Because I treated him terribly, and I'm trying to understand why he never defended himself. Why he never mentioned that he actually knows music." Ms. Wilson studied him for a moment, then sighed. "Look, I don't know the whole story, but I know Daniel used to live in New York, and I know he doesn't talk about his past much. Whatever happened before he came here, he left it behind for a reason." "What reason?" "That's his business, Robert. Not ours." She picked up her coffee and headed for the door, then paused. "But if you really want to make things right, maybe try actually talking to him instead of talking about him." Robert knew she was right. That afternoon, after his last class ended, Robert did something he'd never done before. He walked to the math wing of the school to Daniel's classroom and knocked on the door. "Come in," Daniel's voice called. Robert entered. Daniel looked up from his desk, and surprise crossed his face when he saw who it was. "Robert," Daniel said carefully, "what can I do for you?" Robert closed the door behind him and stood there awkwardly, suddenly feeling like a student called to the principal's office. "I came to apologize," Robert said, properly, "for yesterday and for everything leading up to it." Daniel set down his pen. "Okay, I was cruel," Robert continued. "I made assumptions about you based on nothing but my own prejudices. I wanted to prove that what I do is more important than what you do, and I used you to make myself feel superior." "Why?" Daniel asked simply. The question caught Robert off guard. "What? Why did you need to feel superior?" Daniel asked. "Why was it so important to you to put me down?" Robert looked at the floor. "I don't know. Maybe because the budget cuts made me feel like what I do doesn't matter, like the school doesn't value the arts, and instead of dealing with that feeling, I took it out on you." "The budget cuts aren't my fault," Daniel said quietly. I know that." Robert ran a hand through his hair. "Daniel, where did you learn to play violin? Principal Anderson said you have a background in music, but he wouldn't elaborate." Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot where students were getting into cars and buses. "I grew up in New York," Daniel finally said. "I started violin lessons when I was 4 years old. By the time I was 12, I was performing in recitals. By 16, I was playing with youth orchestras." Robert felt his stomach drop. "You were serious about it?" "Very serious," Daniel said. "I was accepted to Juilliard when I was 17. Robert actually gasped. "Juilliard? The Juilliard school?" Daniel nodded, still looking out the window. "I studied there for 2 years. I performed in some of the best concert halls in New York. I was being groomed for a professional career as a soloist." "What happened?" Robert asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Daniel turned from the window and Robert saw something painful in his eyes. "My younger sister happened," Daniel said softly. "Her name was Lisa. She was 14 years old and she was struggling badly in school, especially in math. She'd come home crying because she couldn't understand algebra because she felt stupid." Robert stood very still, sensing where this was going. "I tried to help her," Daniel continued. "Between rehearsals and performances, I'd sit with her and explain equations, break down problems. And you know what? She got it. She understood when someone took the time to teach her properly. Her grades improved. Her confidence grew." Daniel's voice caught slightly. "Then one night she was riding her bike home from a friend's house. A drunk driver ran a red light. She died instantly. She was 14 years old." "Daniel, I'm so sorry," Robert said. "After she died, I couldn't play anymore," Daniel said. "Every time I picked up my violin, all I could think about was the time I'd spent on stages instead of with her. All those hours practicing, performing, chasing some career that suddenly felt meaningless." He walked back to his desk and sat down heavily. "So I left Juilliard. I went back to school and got a degree in mathematics education, because Lisa taught me something in those tutoring sessions. She taught me that helping one person understand something difficult, helping them feel capable and confident, that mattered more to me than any performance ever could." Robert felt tears stinging his eyes. "I had no idea. How could you?" Daniel said. "I never talk about it. That part of my life is over. I'm a math teacher now. That's who I chose to be." Robert sat down in one of the student desks, feeling small. "And then I came along and mocked you for not being cultured enough, for not understanding art." "You didn't know," Daniel repeated. "That's not an excuse," Robert said. "I should have treated you with respect regardless of your background. Teacher to teacher, person to person." They sat in silence for a moment. The silence in Daniel's classroom stretched between them like a bridge neither man knew how to cross. Outside, the sounds of buses and cars faded as the school emptied out for the day. Finally, Robert spoke. "I don't know how to make this right." Daniel looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something he hadn't expected. Robert Sterling, the confident, arrogant music teacher who always had something to prove, looked genuinely broken. "You already started," Daniel said. "You came here. You apologized. You listened." "That doesn't feel like enough," Robert said. "It's a beginning," Daniel replied. He stood up and walked over to his whiteboard, where equations from his last class were still written in blue marker. "You know what I tell my students when they make mistakes on a test?" Robert shook his head. "I tell them that mistakes are just information. They show us where we need to grow. The question isn't whether we make mistakes, we all do. The question is what we do after we realize we've made them. Robert stood up slowly from the student desk. You're a better person than I am. I'm just a person, Daniel said. Same as you. We all have our struggles. Yours just happen to be different from mine. Robert walked toward the door, then stopped. Daniel, can I ask you something? Of course. Would you ever consider playing again? Not for me, not to prove anything, just because music was part of who you were. Daniel considered this. I don't know. Maybe someday. When it doesn't hurt so much to remember. Robert nodded. If that day comes, I'd be honored to hear you play. He paused at the door. And Daniel? Thank you. For your grace. I didn't deserve it, but thank you. After Robert left, Daniel sat alone in his classroom for a long time, thinking about his sister, about his violin sitting untouched in his closet at home, about the life he'd left behind. The next morning, something unexpected happened. When Daniel arrived at school, he found a note in his mailbox. It was from Robert, handwritten on music staff paper. Daniel, I've been thinking about what you said about math and music being partners. Would you be interested in collaborating on something for the talent show? I have an idea I'd like to discuss. No pressure, just an offer. Robert. Daniel stared at the note for a long moment, then smiled. That afternoon, they met in the music room during their shared free period. Robert had sketches and notes spread across the piano. What if we created a segment that shows how math and music connect? Robert said, his enthusiasm genuine now, not performative. We could have students demonstrate musical intervals and show the mathematical ratios behind them. Or show how rhythm is really just fractions and patterns. Daniel pulled up a chair, intrigued. We could include visuals, geometric patterns that correspond to different musical scales. Show how Fibonacci sequences appear in compositions. Yes, Robert said, leaning forward. And we could have students from both our classes work together. Math students could learn basic music theory. Music students could see the mathematics in what they play every day. For the next hour, they planned together. It was tentative at first, both men careful not to overstep. But gradually, the conversation became easier, more natural. They discovered they actually worked well together. Robert's creative vision balanced by Daniel's organizational skills. Word spread quickly that the two teachers were collaborating. Students were shocked. The teacher's lounge buzzed with gossip. Did you hear? Sterling and Brooks are working together on the talent show. After everything that happened, how is that possible? Ms. Wilson just smiled into her coffee and said nothing. Over the next 2 weeks, something remarkable happened. Students from both classes began working together in ways they never had before. Robert's advanced musicians tutored Daniel's math students on basic music theory. Daniel's top students helped orchestra members understand the physics of sound and the mathematics of harmony. Tyler, who'd always struggled with music appreciation, found himself fascinated when Daniel's former student, now in Robert's orchestra, explained how measure signatures were really just fractions. Amy, Robert's senior violinist, had always been intimidated by trigonometry, until one of Daniel's students showed her how sine waves relate to the sound waves her violin produces. The walls between departments started to crumble. One afternoon, as rehearsals were in full swing, Principal Anderson stopped by to observe. He stood in the back of the music room, watching students from different classes working together. Robert and Daniel moving between groups, offering guidance and encouragement. After the students left, the principal approached both teachers. I have to say, I'm impressed, he said. This collaboration is exactly what education should look like. Robert and Daniel exchanged glances. It's been good for all of us, Daniel said. Better than good, Robert added. I've learned more about my own subject in the past 2 weeks than I have in years. Seeing it through a mathematical lens has given me new ways to teach rhythm and timing, and my students are more engaged when they see how the concepts apply to something creative like music, Daniel said. Principal Anderson nodded thoughtfully. What if this wasn't just for the talent show? What if we made this a permanent thing, an interdisciplinary class that combines music and mathematics? Both teachers looked at him in surprise. We could call it the mathematics of music or something similar. The principal, Al, continued. You'd team teach it. Students could get credit toward both math and arts requirements. Robert looked at Daniel. What do you think? Daniel smiled. I think my sister would have loved it. The night of the talent show arrived. The auditorium was packed with students, parents, and community members. The usual acts performed: singers, dancers, a comedy sketch that got good laughs. Then came the segment Robert and Daniel had created together. The lights dimmed. On the screen behind the stage, geometric patterns began to form, pulsing and shifting in colors. Robert's orchestra started playing a piece they'd composed specifically for this performance. A collaboration between music students and math students, built entirely on mathematical principles. As they played, Daniel stood at the side of the stage with a wireless microphone, explaining the mathematics behind what the audience was hearing. But he didn't lecture. He told stories. He made it accessible, beautiful, human. Every note you're hearing right now corresponds to a specific frequency, Daniel said as the music swelled. When two notes sound good together, it's because their frequencies have a mathematical relationship, simple ratios like 2 to 1 or 3 to 2. The ancient Greeks discovered this thousands of years ago. They understood that music and mathematics were two languages describing the same universal truths. On stage, students from both classes performed together. Musicians played while others displayed visual representations of the sound waves, the patterns, the mathematics dancing through the air. The audience was mesmerized. When the performance ended, the applause was thunderous. Students on stage beamed with pride. Robert and Daniel stood together in the wings, watching their students take their bows. "We should have done this years ago," Robert said quietly. "We weren't ready years ago," Daniel replied. Robert turned to him. "I'm glad we're ready now." In the following months, their new combined class became one of the most popular electives at Westfield High. Students who thought they hated math discovered they loved it when connected to music. Students who thought math was useless saw how it illuminated the art they loved. Robert and Daniel became friends, real friends. They ate lunch together, collaborated on projects, challenged each other's thinking in productive ways. Robert learned humility. Daniel learned it was okay to share his past, to let people see all of who he was. One Friday afternoon, several months after the talent show, Daniel stayed late in his classroom grading papers. Robert knocked on the open door. "Got a minute?" Robert asked. "Sure, come in." Robert held up his violin case. "I was wondering if you'd like to play something with me. Just for us. No audience, no pressure. Just two teachers making music together." Daniel hesitated, then smiled. "I don't have my violin here." "Actually," Robert said, pulling a second case from behind his back, "I picked up a loaner from the music store. Been keeping it in my classroom just in case you ever wanted to try again." Daniel stared at the case, emotions warring on his face. Fear, grief, longing, hope. "I don't know if I can," he said honestly. "That's okay," Robert replied. "But the offer stands. Today, tomorrow, next month, next year. Whenever you're ready. If you're ever ready." Daniel stood up and walked over to Robert. Slowly, carefully, he took the violin case. He opened it and lifted out the instrument, feeling the familiar weight in his hands. "Just something simple," Daniel said. "Nothing fancy." "Perfect," Robert said, taking out his own violin. They stood together in the empty classroom as the sun set outside, filling the room with golden light. Two teachers, two very different paths that had somehow converged, and as they began to play, hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence, the music filled the space between them. It wasn't perfect. Daniel's fingers were rusty and he missed notes. But that wasn't the point. The point was the trying, the sharing, the bridge built between two people who had started as adversaries and become something better. When they finished, Robert said, "Your sister would be proud of you." Daniel's eyes glistened. "I think she would be proud of both of us," and in that moment, in that quiet classroom with the golden light fading, two teachers understood what their students had learned weeks ago, that the best education doesn't come from proving you're better than someone else. It comes from learning together, growing together, and recognizing that everyone has something valuable to teach. The challenge that had started with mockery and pride had transformed into something neither man expected: friendship, growth, and the understanding that real strength lies not in tearing others down, but in building each other up. And that lesson, more than any equation or musical composition, was worth passing on to the next generation.